Ernst, white farmers in South Africa are essentially facing two threats. One being land expropriation without compensation, as we've discussed, and this violence and attacks on white farms. Let's start with the farm attacks. We've just mentioned an attack that happened this past weekend. How prevalent are these attacks?
It's very prevalent, and we are a bit concerned about the report that came out last year, which claimed that it's on a 19 or a 20-year low. Which is quite easy to disprove, and we can go into the details of that if you want. But the point is that we're actually on a 13-year high, and we have the statistics to back this up. Just in the last year, we saw the attacks skyrocketing, although the murders have declined slightly. And the reason, therefore, is I think farmers are more vigilant and protecting themselves. But what we see currently is we have about one farm attack on average every day, and we have on average more than one murder per week. But the sheer numbers is only part of the problem. It's the brutality of these tortures that's a significant part of the problem. And then on top of that, we have hate speech. We have political leaders chanting, kill the boer, kill the farmer from political podiums after making inflammatory speeches. And then on top of that, now we have this push by the South African government to confiscate the land without compensation.
Well, let's focus first again on these farm attacks. Yeah. The South African government denies that this is a big problem. They're saying that these claims of murders and attacks are exaggerated. We just gave you the Agri-SA figures, which show 47 murders. But I hear your point that they're attacks that don't necessarily result in murders because the farmers are better defending themselves. But the South African government says that these are not racially motivated, that this is just part of the general crime issue that South Africa grapples with. What do you say to that?
Well,
How do you respond?
There's many ways to disprove that. One is to look at the sheer numbers. So we often hear, yes, but the numbers are fairly small in comparison to all the murders that happens in South Africa. We need to consider that there's 57 million people in South Africa. The farming community is very small. So you have to look at the ratios per 100,000. And if you look at the ratios, you will see that it's completely disproportionate. But it's a bigger thing than just the ratios. It's a particular climate that has been created in South Africa in which violence towards minorities, but violence towards farmers in particular, is being romanticized by politicians, and to such an extent that it's regarded as less condemnable if you murder a white farmer than if you were to murder, for example, someone coming in from Zimbabwe. We've heard politicians say, don't commit xenophobic violence towards other black people, for example. So I mean, there's a long list of reasons, but the point is it's not the only problem that South Africa faces, but it is a very serious problem.
What would you like the South African government to do to better address this violence that the white farmers are experiencing?
Well, there's a few things. We believe that it should be declared as a priority crime. We have many priority crimes in South Africa, but this one isn't for some inexplainable reason.
What do you mean by a priority crime?
What we mean by a priority crime is there should be a focused government counter-strategy to prevent these attacks and to curb these attacks from happening.
What are the other crimes that have this status?
Poaching of rhinos, for example, is a priority crime. Copper cable theft is a priority crime. Cash in transit heists,
and
violence
yet
against
white
women and
farmer
children
attacks is not a priority crime.
Yes, it shouldn't even be white farmer attacks, just farm attacks. But when you speak to government, they would say, yes, we need a counter strategy to stop gang-related violence, to stop violence against women and children, to stop rhino poaching. But when you talk about farm attacks, the answer is no, this isn't a problem. We shouldn't. But the bigger problem here, once again, is the political climate. So what should happen, part of the solution is our leaders, including even our presidents, should stop singing about murdering people. That's what they do from public platforms, and it happens regularly in South Africa.
You're referring to members of the economic freedom fighters.
No, well, the economic freedom fighters and the ANC. Our former president Jacob Zuma sang at the ANC's centenary gathering with literally people in military uniform dancing in front of him. It's the online video is there. It's on YouTube, singing about shooting farmers. And people were dancing and ululating, and it's completely unacceptable, but it's sort of regular pastime in South Africa.
The other issue that we mentioned, Ernst, and this is shocking, obviously, this is shocking, especially to an American audience, but the other issue that you want to bring attention to is land expropriation without compensation. The government has voted to change the Constitution to allow for that.
Yeah.
Where does that stand right now?
So where we are, the short version is after that decision was taken, there was a parliamentary committee to look into the matter. They found that the vast majority of people, about 2/3 of people in the country, are against the idea. But nonetheless, they recommended that they continue with the changing of the Constitution. So there's an election now in May. The next step would be after the election for Parliament to continue with this process, to publish the text, to say this is how we're going to change the Constitution, to erode property rights.
President Ramaphosa has dismissed warnings of how this could cause foreign investment to plummet. He says that unlike Zimbabwe, where we know this led to tremendous economic collapse, that South Africa is going to manage this better. It's not going to lead to an economic collapse. Him and other people have this position that this land redistribution is necessary to address the past, to address the inequality. To quote him, he says, to address what we have termed the original sin, which was committed against black South Africans during colonial and apartheid days.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Well, it's difficult to respond if it's a vague statement, but what I can say is if we should differentiate between what we call restitution and what we call redistribution. Restitution is something that should be supported. Restitution is about saying there where black people's land was taken from them in the past under the apartheid system or wherever, that land should be given back. And that's something that we support, and it's not very controversial. That's been happening for a quarter of a century in South Africa. But the different approach now that we suddenly have is to say, well, we have to look at the color of your skin, regardless of how you got the land, and the color of your skin will determine if you are a legitimate owner of that land. That's just plain racist to say the color of your skin determines whether you should.
So it's not so much the apartheid revisions that you have an issue with. It's going back to the colonial past, which is that's where you take major offense, that it's trying to change the colonial history of South Africa.
Well, it's the issue where we take offense that they have these ideas and they have these proposed outcomes, but there's no link between the two. So they would say, we're going to take property rights, we're going to start taking people's property, and it would be good for the economy. So we say in South Africa that it's like saying we're going to expand KFC, but no chickens will be harmed in the process.
I'm glad you still have a sense of humor about all of this.
So our government I ask them regularly when I'm in interviews with them or debates, I ask them, do you still maintain that Robert Mugabe and Hugo Chavez are heroes? And they would immediately say, yes, they are. We believe Robert Mugabe and Hugo Chavez are heroes for what they did in Zimbabwe and Venezuela. We're going to do the same thing, or we are inspired by what they are doing, but we're going to do it differently, and they can't explain how. And then they would say, this time it's going to boost the economy. It just doesn't make sense.
Yet history has shown time and time again that this is a failed policy and makes the economy worse for all the residents of the country. So you're here in the United States. What are you hoping to achieve with this visit? Who are you speaking to? What do you want the U.S. government to do?
We spent the whole week in Washington last week, and we spoke to a lot of people on the Hill. We spoke to the State Department. We spoke to media and think tanks especially. Our goal here is a few things. We want people to speak out about what's happening in South Africa. We don't expect of the U.S. to fly down to South Africa and solve our problems, but at least to make public statements about what is happening in South Africa. And there are different ways of putting diplomatic pressure on the South African government, because it does, if you look at the bigger picture, the geopolitical picture, it would have an impact on US interests as well. And we believe that there are important reasons why the US should take a stance on what is happening in South Africa.
All right, Ernst, Roets, Baie dankie. Thank you very much. Good to have you with us.